For a project, I was asked to create an invitation-based sign-up system using Supabase as the backend and WeWeb for the front end. So I dug in. It took me some time to figure it out, but the good news is that it is totally doable. There are just some things to consider. So in this video, I'll show you exactly how I implemented this. We'll go over the requirements, the flow, the architecture, and then how it's built. But before we start, I'm Fabio. I'm a consultant turned dev, and for the past year I've been building with Supabase and WeWeb, creating setups like the one I'm about to show you. You can follow me on X, @fishfrom96, to see more of the stuff I do. Okay, so for me the first step in understanding what we need to build is to understand the requirements. So I've listed the requirements for this specific feature right here, and we'll go through them so you understand what direction I took to implement the solution. So on a high level, we want to be able to do a few things. There are a few roles, of which one is the admin and the other one is the invited user, so an anonymous user. The admin should be able to invite a user to the app, which they will do in WeWeb in their admin environment using a sign-up form, an invite form. Then an email should be sent to the invited user. The invited user should be able to click on a button in the mail, which will redirect them to the invite page, the sign-up page, where they can set their own password. We need to make sure that the invitation is unique to the invited user, and we will use a token for this. And admins should at all times have an overview of the invites and their status. Then there are some things to consider security-wise. So we want to make sure invites are always protected with RLS. So naturally, we're going to create an invites table in Supabase, and we want to protect this table with RLS. And this is actually a very important point because this creates a challenge for us in the direction we can go with the solution, but I'll come back to this later. Admin should be able to create, read, update, and delete the invites, and invited users can only use their token and set a password for their own account. Then regarding the tokens, we only want them to be valid for a limited period, and we've set this period to 7 days. And invites with used or expired tokens should automatically be deleted, which means we'll have to build a cron job in the backend. Now coming back to the RLS part, because we're setting RLS on the invites table and we are inviting anonymous users, they won't be able to read their tokens because it's protected with RLS. Unless we set the read function open to anyone, but that would mean that anyone could read any invite record, and that's something we don't want. So we have to get creative here and try to solve this problem in a different way, which I've done and which I'll show you in the flow. So this is the main flow. I've color coded them for you. So here's WeWeb, Supabase, and we'll need a mail service provider. I guess that's Bravo. So it all starts with the admin. They will fill in the invite form. Once they submit the form, we will insert a record into the invite table. And then here's the part where we circumvent the limitations of the RLS, because we will just create a user and set up temp password. So the invited user will already be created in Supabase, and they will just have a temporary password. This way we can create an RLS policy where a signed-in user can view their own record from the invites table. So where the user ID matches with the user ID in the invites table record. That also means that we can sign in the user in the front end on page load, which I'll show later. Oh, and one important detail, we will use the token as the temporary password. Then on the record insert, we should also call the mail template. Well, in Bravo's case, we have to call a mail template, and we need to send over the invitation data. So that means the token, the name, the email address, etc. Then Bravo will send the right email template, fill the parameters, send the email to the invited user. User will receive the mail, open it, click the link, then go to a sign-up page where they have a complete sign-up form and where they can choose their own password. And then when they submit that form, we should change the password, of course, and activate the account. And lastly, redirect them to the app. Sounds simple enough, but there are some steps here to implement. Now that we know the requirements and we know the flow, we can start creating an architecture for this, which I've drawn out right here. Again, I've color-coded it. WeWeb, the front end, has 2 pages, the invites page and the form, and the sign-up page where they set the password. It starts with the admin, who fills in the invite form, which creates the invite and inserts it into the user invites table. Then when the record is being created, we will create that temporary user. And to do this, we will need an edge function. So we will create an edge function that creates a user in Supabase. Then that edge function should return the user ID and log that into the user invites table for logging purposes. For the create temp user, we'll have to create a trigger and a Postgres function, which will call the user creation edge function. And in that same Postgres function, we can call a mail edge function, which will cover the call to your email service provider. And one note here, I highly recommend setting up a generalized mailing system in Supabase so that you only need one single edge function to send any type of email. I actually did this after I created the invitation mail edge function, so the one you'll see is specifically made for invitation mail. There are actually some topics on the WeWeb forum about this, and I could make a separate video about this if that's requested. In the mail edge function, it should receive all the data needed for Brevo. So it needs the email, it needs the name, it needs all the other parameters that are needed for the mail. Then it will call the mail service and Brevo will send the transactional mail template to the registered user. Brevo will return a status response and we will log that into the user invites table so that we know when the mail was sent and if it was successful. Then the user will get the mail, they will click the invitation link, get on the sign up page again, like I already covered, choose the password, and then when they submit the form in WeWeb, we will update the password, which is in authored users. Then to keep everything clean, we need a daily cleanup cron. This cron job will check for used and expired invites. If an invitation is expired, then we will delete the temporary user using the user deletion X function. So that's another edge function we have to create. And it will delete the record for used or expired records in the user invites table. So with this setup, we cover the entire flow. We cover all of the requirements, and you'll successfully be able to set up an invitation system in Supabase WeWeb. So let's start building it now, I guess. All right, so now we can start building the table, and I of course already built it, so I'll walk you through it. We of course have the ID, which is just a UUID, which is being generated. We need the name, we need the email. Then we have the token, which is also just a generated UUID. Then we have the expire set. As I said in the requirements, we need it to be valid for 7 days. So we will have a default value of now plus 7 days, and it's a timestamp. We've created that for logging purposes. Optional message, language, which is important for me because that determines which mail template we will use, because we have both Dutch and English templates, but this is of course highly dependent on your use case. I have a used boolean. We use this in the cron job to check if the invitation is used or not. Then we have a metadata field, and the metadata is simply a JSONB, which will data from the invite form that is used in the profile for this project. And this metadata will also be saved in the auth users metadata later on by the edge function. We have the role as well. It's also specific to this project. Then we have the user ID. That one is important. It will be filled by the user creation edge function. So by default it's empty. The same goes for the user created boolean, the user created boolean. And then we have the email sent and email sent at fields. So the boolean and the timestamp, which are both filled by the invitation email edge function. And with that, you have a table set up So now that we have set up the user's invites table, we can start setting the RLS on the table so that it's protected. And we want to do two things here. We want the admins to have full access on the table, so create, read, update, delete rights. But more importantly, we want the invitee to be able to read their own invite. And since we've gone with a solution where we're using a login with a temporary password, it's pretty straightforward. So if we look at the policy, what you'll see is we'll check on the auth UID and it should match the user ID field. And that's why this user ID field is so important, because that's the field where the Edge function logs the user ID after creating the user. And that's how we basically give access to that record. All right, and with that, we have completed the user invites table creation, and we can continue with the other steps. And in this case, it's easier to work from back to front within Supabase. So we should start with the Edge functions, and then we can create the Postgres function trigger that will call the Edge functions. So for the Edge functions, you can see I've created 3 of them: send invite email, the create user, and the delete user. The delete user is used by the cron job, and the create user and send invite email jobs are the ones where we will look at right now. So let's start with the create user one, because that's the first one we will call. Now, of course, with the Edge function code, we can just generate that with AI, and that's exactly the thing I did as well. Just make sure that you correctly map all the fields so you won't, get errors or whatever. And you'll need your secrets for your database in order to have the rights to create the user. All right, so if we now go to the create user code, we can just walk through it so you understand what happens, which can help with your prompt for the AI. So we are validating the inputs that are needed. So we need the email, we need the invite ID, we need the token as the bare minimum. We need the email because that's going to be the username. We need the token because that's going to be the temp password. And we need the invite ID because that's the record that needs to be updated with the user ID after the user is created. All right, so there's a bunch of stuff happening. It will create the user with the email. We'll set the email confirm to true, and the password will be the token. Then it will insert the metadata from the metadata field to the user, and it will do a bunch of logging as well. Then if all goes well, it will set the user created to true in the invites table, and it will fill in the user ID for that record. For the send invite email Edge function, we are using Brevo for the mail service, so we need to call the Brevo API, which of course certain things. So it expects the API key. Well, I created a secret for that, so we're calling that. And then for the email itself, it expects a certain payload. So we at least need the email, the name, the token, and the invite ID. And again, the invite ID here is needed to update the record with the logging after the email was sent successfully. Or if it actually failed, it will log that as well. And one thing we do within the email, we actually want the first name extracted from the name, from the whole name, because we personalize the email template, and we are sending the expiration date of the invite as well, and we format that in a day, month, year format. So that's what's happening here. And then we structure the actual payload that Brevo receives. But first we select the template that we need. So based on the language field in the invite, we either send the Dutch template or the English template. And then here's the payload. So we have a sender, we have a receiver, and then a template ID, and Brevo expects params, which are variables that we can use within the Brevo email template, which I will show you next up. Then we will wait for the response from Brevo, we will log it, and then we will update the user invites table where we set the email sent to true and the email sent to now. And that's this Edge function. Now again, generated with AI, just use this as an example for your prompting, and it's highly dependent on your email provider how they expect the payload. Now that we've created the email Edge function, let's first Take a look at the transactional mail template because you've seen the variables just now. So here in Bravo, I have a template. This one is the English one. And as you can see, we have a few parameters within the template, and here you see first name again, and that's the params of first name, just like you saw in the edge function code. Kind of important here is the button, because the button has the link target, so the URL to your WeWeb sign up page with two variables that we will use to sign in the user and to validate the token. So within the link, I'm setting two variables, the token and the email. And since we set the temporary password to the token, now WeWeb actually has the token and the email. But we have to set it up in WeWeb as well, which I will show you right now. All right, so this is the sign up page in WeWeb, and we have to set up the URL so that it expects these parameters that we set in the URL. You can do this by going to the page and then the URL path. And as you can see here, we have the URL path and you can add parameters. And I added a parameter for token and a parameter for email, which corresponds with the ones in the Bravo link target. One small detail or tip I'd like to give you is please don't forget to add the last slash here, because I forgot to do that and the actual page didn't load and I couldn't figure out why. It turned out to be this one freaking slash. So yeah, just tip there. All right, so if we go back to the architecture now, we've set up the user invites table, we set up the edge functions, you've seen the email template and the sign up page, and we made sure that these URLs match in structure. But before we continue with the front end part, let's go back to Supabase, because we still need to be able to call these edge functions. And for that, we will need a Postgres function with a trigger. And the trigger is on insert or after insert, and that will call the Postgres function, which in its turn will call both of the edge functions. So let's do that right now. As you can see, we created a database trigger. So on user invites insert setup user, it's on our invites table, and it calls the setup user from invite function after insert orientation row. Then for the Postgres function, we start by calling the create user edge function that we created, and make sure to map the fields that the edge function expects correctly, otherwise you'll get errors. So we're sending again the email, the invite ID, token, and the metadata. And I explained this before in the edge function already, so I won't cover it here again. Then we wait until that one is done. If there is an error, we will log it into the debug table. If you don't have one, create one, it's kind of useful. And secondly, we call the send invite email edge function. And again, here we send everything that it's expecting. And if it fails, we log the error into the debug table. Once you're done with that, you've basically done all the main stuff in Supabase. You'll still have to create the cron job, which you can do with the help of AI. And that cron job should of course call the delete user edge function if the invitation has expired and the user is not activated yet. But I'll leave that to you. We should continue with the front end part by finishing up the workflows on page load and how to handle the password updating. So here we are at the sign up page again, and we should create a workflow on page load that logs in the user or the invited user with the temporary password. So we can go to your page, trigger page workflows, create a new one. I already have it right here. And the first thing you'll see is that I actually call another Postgres function that I created, which is to validate the invite token. So again, in the URL, we are, in the URL parameter, we are already receiving the token. But I created another Postgres function which checks if that token is still valid and if it hasn't been used. Because there's a little gap with the cron job, I just want to use this as a fallback. Then we have a split. If the token is valid, we can continue. If it's false, then we change the variable and it will give an error message on the page. But if it's true, we will log in the user with the temp password. Now remember, because we sent the email and the token in the page parameters, we can use those to sign in the user. So we simply use the current page parameter email, and the token for the password. And it will sign in the user when the page loads. Once you've done that and a page does load, we want the user to finish their sign up. And as you can see, I have a little sign up form right here with the full name and email, and it actually retrieves the full name from the invite record. Since we're now logged in and we set the RLS, they are able to read their own record, and we can actually retrieve the full name. So it will pre-fill the full name and the email field, and they just have to fill in the password, repeat the password, and then click the sign up button. And that should of course trigger the unsubmit workflow, which we have right here. And that's actually a pretty simple one, because we simply change the password. The old password is still the token, the new password is whatever they filled in. And then I have another Postgres function which does a bunch of things which are related to this project and not really relevant for now. But if you need to do something on user activation, this is a way of doing that. And after that, we navigate to the home page of the app. And that's it. You now have a fully functioning invitation system for your application. I hope everything was clear. If you still have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask them. I'll be happy to answer them. And yeah, if any follow-up is needed, just let me know. Again, you can follow me on X at fishfrom96 for more content to follow. All right, thank you very much, and see you in the next one.